Hey everyone, this is Erica Lucas, your host and founding member of VEST, an organization connecting women across industries, regions, and career levels so that together we can expedite the pipeline of more women in positions of power and influence. Welcome to another episode of the Vester podcast, where we explore the invisible barriers holding women back in the workplace and share stories of women building power collectively.
I mean, it's been a racket for a long time, making women feel we're socialized not to kind of stand in our power. Even if maybe our parents said you can do anything, we're still met with obstacles and messages, at times penalized for speaking to our accomplishments. So I'm not going to deny the reality that there are going to be some people that will bristle. But I always tell women, there are men out there with half of the accomplishments and qualifications that you have that are happily coasting by us in a lot of different ways. So a couple of things. Number one, we have to be an advocate for ourselves. I was raised to you better work really, really hard. Excuse me. If you work really hard, people will notice your work, and you will rise because of that. And that's not always the case. A lot of times it's the person that's developing a network, speaking to their ability and speaking to their vision.
Jill Wesley is the founder of Science and Soul of Speaking, where she works with accomplished professionals who are already doing incredible work and now need to speak about it on bigger stages. Across her career, Jill has trained and coached over 80,000 executives and high-performing employees in some of the world's top companies and institutions. As a speaker herself, she has delivered more than 300 keynotes in all 50 states and in 25 countries. Join us as we talk to Jill about the power of using our voice and stories to ignite movements and seed lasting change in our communities. This coaching session was recorded in 2020 as part of a more intimate coaching session with VEST members and has now been repurposed to accommodate this episode. What do you say to women who are still struggling to use that voice or their story to influence or impact others?
This question means a lot to me because I believe we have the right and the responsibility to use our voices. On a deeper level, I understand why women at times feel like it's challenging or overwhelming or stressful to speak up. And there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome, and it's real. I mean, the fact that we can get in our own heads, and every level that we get to, there can be another round of, who am I to be doing this? Are people going to find out? I'm writing a book right now. And I was excited to get the book deal. And then I had this moment of wait, can I do this? And I thought, well, wait, I've been only doing this for 30 years. I should be able to write something about this. So that part's real. But there's also, sometimes we feel imposter syndrome because people treat us like an imposter. Some of you are in meetings where maybe you're one of the only women there. And the behavior around us indicates that, maybe our messages or our thoughts are not as important. So what I really want everyone to remember is there's so much value that you bring, and speaking and using your voice is a lot like branding, meaning like a personal brand. If we're not really clear about who we are, what we represent, where we want to take things, then other people make assumptions about us, and they will come up with how they think we need to, we show up, etc. I want to be able to be visible and speak to the things that matter most to me. I love that I heard a baby. That makes me smile. Adorable. So what I want everyone to think about is, you wouldn't be in the positions you are now and charting the future if you didn't deserve to be there. And we need more women to speak up. And your voices, we need as many perspectives discussed. And you also have you navigate the world differently than men do. And so your experience is valuable. So I want people to speak up. And if there's times where you're intimidated, I always tell, I do keynote coaching. That's my primary work, but I taught public speaking for 20 years at a university and to employees. What I would tell people to do if they have that fear or that concern about being visible is tap back into the value and think of how you can provide service. Like, when we are too quiet in meetings and we're not using our voice, the organization itself or the team is missing out.
I have a question for you, Jill. So my own weird imposter syndrome, I'm perfectly comfortable speaking out and speaking at meetings, but I've worked in social services and education and I'm very comfortable leading from behind.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the people out front right now are not doing a great job, so I need to sort of step up a bit. So I think that's like where the keynote makes me more uncomfortable, because I've built my career and my sort of like thing from, hey, she doesn't need all the credit. She's happy just to kind of, again, push from behind. So thoughts on how you mentally make that shift.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people are going from giving presentations in a work meeting to doing an actual keynote, it is a leap. I mean, it's understanding that, yeah, you are in a different, if you're positioned as a subject matter expert on a stage, or you're there to provide a section of content or a directive to a group, all eyes are on you in a different way. So what I ask people to do, what I do with clients is service-oriented speaking. So what ends up happening is a lot of times people will stress out about, what am I going to say? And what I want everyone to think about it first is, who are these people and what do they need? And one of the biggest things that I can help people with when it relates to feeling nerves is, most of the time when we're worried and feeling really nervous, if we can shift back to, oh my gosh, if I could just have 10 minutes with one of the people in this room and I truly wanted to show up and provide service, what would I tell them? If you can tap back into service, that often can reframe things. The other piece is understanding when you're doing a keynote, you really do have to prepare. And what a lot of people will do, and this often makes people more nervous. So I'll speak to the nerves and kind of bundle it in, Amy, with your question. A lot of people, when they're preparing to do a talk of some sort, they may decide that they're going to use slides. Do any of you, can I see a show of hands? Like, who uses slides when they present in general, whether it's a meeting or okay, it depends on the situation. But a lot of people will know they're going to do a talk, and then they sit down, and the first thing they do is open a slide deck, and they'll either create new slides right out of the gate, or look at existing slides and try and Frankenstein create a new monster right out of the gate. If you do that, that means that the slides are telling the story and the slides are your notes, versus don't open any deck at all and really think about, what's the topic I'm going to speak to? Who are the people in the audience? What are they up against? What pressures do they have? Who are my allies? Who supports what I'm going to say? Where do they get stuck? Like, really it's design thinking, basically, is really having empathy for who they are and the information they need. And then asking yourself, okay, taking that into consideration, the conditions at play, whatever that's happening, the landscape, what's the one thing I really want them to remember from the conversation or the keynote? And so you always start with, what is the main point, the big idea, the core message? And after this talk, what would I want them to do? And what often happens, and that it builds the nerves, is people just start writing down a ton of ideas. There's a lot of information, and it feels overwhelming because immediately people think, oh no, I have to memorize all this stuff. But when you first start with who's the audience, what's the point I want to make, what's the action I want them to take, and then what are the key pieces of evidence that I will present to get them there, then you have to do that first before you can start creating your slides. Because if not, we have way too much content on our slides when we prepare them too early, and you end up reading them, and that's when we don't sound like a regular person. So I would just recommend, if anybody's giving a higher stakes presentation or a keynote, that you really think about that story you want to tell them, and remember that service matters more than anything. When it comes to nerves about public speaking, I have bad news and I have bad news. The bad news is, if you think that at one point you're going to live forever free of having any nerves, I got news for you. They will always kind of show up, and it may show up when you don't expect it. And the other bad news I have is telling yourself that you shouldn't be nervous or doing any type of, negative self-talk. The bad news is that only makes it worse. And women in particular will have this inner critic that happens where it's like, I can't, where you're thinking like, I shouldn't feel this way. And feeling, that's bad news. You're making it worse. If you can reframe it and understand that I work with pro athletes, I work with CEOs who speak for all the time or have to perform under pressure. Nerves do not mean that you're going to fail. It's your body is trying to protect you. It perceives a threat and it's doing what it's supposed to do, even if the situation, you're not in front of a saber-tooth tiger, but your body perceives it as a fear, and it's kicking in a series of behavior of chemicals, are coursing through your body, and you're having these reactions. It thinks it's protecting you. So think about I really want you to consider what you say to yourself when it happens. And I just tell people, like, expect it, so you're not surprised, and have a mitigation plan. So I can go into you want me to give you some top tips for nerves, if that's helpful? All right, so the first thing is, when you are, and you know what I'll do, Erica, too, is I call it relaxed and ready exercises. I'll send that to you, and we can send it out to your community too. Because I'm always the one backstage with someone that's like, look at me. You could, I'm either like a general where I'm like, you can do that. No, or I'm like the softest, sweetest person I have to meet them where they are. But one of the things that'll happen is most people feel nerves because their talk is inside of their heads. So they've put slides together, or they put their ideas together, and then silently in their heads, they're saying things like, okay, I'm going to say that, like they're mentally talking through the talk versus standing up and saying it out loud prior to the actual meeting or prior to being on stage. Even if we're in a virtual only world right now, I still want people to stand up and practice their talk multiple times, because what it does is it tells your mind and body, the rehearsal piece helps you get really comfortable with your own content. Ideally, you should practice in front of another person. If there's a mammal, I'll take anybody. Like, have someone else listen to what you're saying, because your own thought process isn't always intuitive for an audience. And practicing standing up, even if you know you're going to be seated, helps your body feel more comfortable. So think about this. You've probably been in a meeting where you thought you were going to sit down, and someone said, oh, can you stand up and present? And has anybody had that like rush of, oh, you have this stress response? So I always have people practice standing up, because even if they know they're going to be seated, it will feel more comfortable. So please remember, nerves are totally normal. I've worked with NFL players who speak for their foundations or for nonprofits or for the brands that they partner with. And when they played football, many of them would be up all night before a big game, or every Sunday throw up before a game. They just know that nerves are normal, and they play through it. They know that it doesn't have to dictate how the game is going to go, and it's the same thing we can do.
This group is made up of CEOs, philanthropists, executive directors, founders, and everything in between. So some of us do public speaking, even if there's fear, like we have to do it. What about, though, the need to be genuine and the power of vulnerability, right? I used to maybe as a protection mechanism not want to be vulnerable when I spoke. Like I didn't want to talk about failures or what got me to where I am. And you really pushed me through that when you were coaching me. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, Brene Brown's famous for the work around vulnerability. The piece that matters, especially when you're in a leadership role, is that you can relate to your audience. And what people will forget when they're leading other people, at times they'll forget that they may be 3 steps ahead or 5 steps ahead or 20 steps ahead of their audience. And if an audience member can't relate to what someone is saying on a stage or in a virtual meeting, they'll just tune out. And the vulnerability piece, now I think of it as there's a spectrum of sorts. I don't coach people to be motivational speakers. I'm not knocking it, but that's not my jam. But I'm always getting people to put a motivational component into their talks because I care about behavioral change. I care about, like, what do people do when they leave the meeting or leave the event? Because people can feel good in a moment and have, tears or standing ovations, and people can get focused on that. And I care about what's it like for them when they go back to work or when they go home to their families. Are we going to move the needle? So when we think about vulnerability, there's some people who want to put it all out there, and that can work against us because it can be oversharing, or if we're not ready to tell a story and it's too raw. And what can happen is the audience can feel an element of discomfort, and also shift from an audience to a caretaker, where they actually shift to, I hope she's okay. Now, if something spontaneous comes up and you just share it, I mean, 2020 has been nonstop. So I think we've all had some really vulnerable, authentic moments that weren't practiced, that we shared, and it's not something that we had planned on talking about, but it came out, and those moments are also important. But if you have time to prepare, being authentic matters, but make sure you don't owe the audience really anything that feels really painful for you to talk about and that you're not ready to talk about. A lot of clients will come to me and say, I know I should talk about this. And when we go through the story, they're still kind of reliving it and it's painful. And I'll say, listen, you don't have to tell, you could do a 3-sentence version of it. You don't have to unpack everything for the audience's sake. However, you do need to show up as a normal person. So I can use you as an example, Erica. When we started working together, I saw, like, oh, there's this incredible woman and she has all these accomplishments. And I said, give me a little run through of what you plan on talking about. And as she went through it, it was, like you said, data. It was so, like, I dotted all my I's and crossed my T's because she's always had to do that. Like, I think some of you have had to. And I said, awesome. So, but why are you doing this work? Well, it's the middle of the country. And I'm like, yeah, but why are you doing this work? So it's the old question of 5 whys. When you think of, if you want to do a TEDx talk, let's say, ask yourself, like, whatever message you think you have, ask yourself the question, why, 5 times to get to the root of what it is. And Erica's story is beautiful around, her early life journey and her grandmother owning a store and being an entrepreneur and sharing those little moments of, I'll remember, it's always like, factor in the price of tax when you put your price together. Wasn't that her? So, but that matters. You could have said something like, your pricing strategy is really critical when you're moving into a new market. Oh, true. But when you add that little real life element of, hey, my grandmother owned a store, and I remember that it was flowers. Okay. So that we were always, our busiest time for the store were the holidays for everybody else, and what that meant, and the sacrifice, but it was bringing joy. Like when you craft this picture about who you are, that matters to an audience, and our brains are wired to remember the content better that way. So what I want you to think about, and you could jot down a couple notes when you're putting something together, when you're going to talk to a group of people, you really want to think about combining, who they are and what you think matters most to them. And also think about what's interesting about your personal journey at work. What is there an interesting element of your culture that matters? So, I'm from California. I grew up with a next door neighbor who is from Nebraska. I have all of these sayings in my, because I heard Lois Moberg saying them. Nobody else said it in California, but like you can't put 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag. Like that's Nebraska talking. And I still use it now with my clients. So those little elements that you can pepper in to your talk that has to do with your culture, or wisdom from family members, or a proverb, or something that relates to who you see yourself as. Are you known as the problem solver? Are you the person that other people lean on to kind of get clarity? Mention those elements when you're speaking along with your stories. And that helps people connect to your content, and you want them to relate to your content, remember your content so they can repeat it. If your message and your content isn't repeatable, then it's very difficult to get behavioral change. They have to be able to get what you're saying and then repeat it to their own team, or say it to themselves after you speak to them.
But Elizabeth says, do you have any particular tips for Zoom panels presentation? It's so hard when you can't gauge audience feedback and interact with moderators. I think that's particularly true for like webinars when you're not looking at the reaction that people are having. That's a good question.
Okay, first thing, when you are doing a virtual talk and you can't see everybody's face, but whether you can or you can't, first thing I'd love for you to do is take a little teeny, like cut a little piece of a sticky note and put like a small one, and just write either, depends on the client. I either have them write the word energy, or make 2 eyes, or write the word smile, not in the condescending way you tell women to smile, but a lot of people forget that you need 25% more energy when you present virtually than you do when you're just talking to people. So the people don't realize when they're presenting virtual that their affect is off, and everything's kind of muted, not in the like no volume sense, but everything's toned down. So you have to give yourself a visual reminder to show up with energy, especially when you can't see people. Now, there's always kind of an energy curve though. So people will start out with high energy and then it'll crater. So what I tell people is, as they go from section to section of their content, when you're presenting a new idea, or the next section, is to remind yourself to push reset and to bring that energy back up, because you are fighting for everybody's attention. When we were in person with each other, when people didn't pay attention, people wouldn't like pull out. They're in the middle of a meeting, they wouldn't necessarily pull out, a burrito and do their nails and check their email at the same time. But that's just me. But that's what people are doing when we're speaking. So your energy matters. The other thing that I really want you to consider is, if there's someone else who can handle the greeting and the chat and the onboarding of people while they're coming onto a call, is helpful. So you could focus, your attention isn't split too much. And if you can do something where you're asking them to participate in some context where they can do something in the chat or they can raise their hand. Look for opportunities to include maybe questions ahead of time that you can address for them, or if you know you have time in your talk that they can ask questions throughout the presentation. When you're the last thing I would say when you're doing a virtual talk that I see that's a real challenge is they're too long. Most people are making their virtual presentations too long. So if it's a webinar in particular, people will hit a wall. Generally, an hour is the max. So be strategic. If you're the subject matter expert and you're doing a webinar, let's say, think about how you can pare things down. If you're speaking in a virtual meeting, put your your game plan together before you get there, and think of 3 things. This is the other sticky note that my clients have on their wall in their offices, is you remember 3 things: point, proof, and action. So if it's a business meeting, think ahead of time, okay, what's this topic? Is there a point I can make on this particular topic? Is there proof? What will I share? A customer story, share a conversation I had with someone? Is there data? And is there an action step? Is there something ahead of time that I need to think about? So if someone says that's a good idea, I don't have to think on the spot, what do I do? So point, proof, and action are the 3 steps that I have my clients put on their wall so they can just stay on point.
I love that, Jill. We also have a question from Tiffany.
Mm-hmm.
Is there such a thing as being too vulnerable when public speaking?
Yes, it's that exact thing. I shared that some people will speak to something that's still too painful, and they can shift from speaker to someone who's like, it's a confession, or it can change the dynamic. The other piece around being kind of too vulnerable is if it's not a setting where people should be trusted with the information. And I see a few nods. Have any of you had that experience where you have shared something from a really honest place and it either wasn't met with empathy, or that you felt bad afterwards because you didn't get a sense that the person cared or the audience mattered? So that's why knowing your audience is really important, and getting a sense of kind of who they are. So I can be confusing to people. I'll just say it this way. I'm very friendly, but I'm private. So to me, there's a difference. I'm friendly and I love engaging with people, but I'm not someone that like puts all my business out there. And in this world of reality TV and social media, I think a lot of people feel like they have to say everything, and you don't. I'll make mention of challenges. I don't ever pretend that everything is easy, and but I do like to keep some boundaries. So what you can do is, when you're practicing, when you put your content together, and let's say you're practicing, even if it's with a meeting that is a bigger deal, and you're running it by a friend, or the person doesn't have to be in your industry. If you run it by someone that they can say, I don't know if do you want to talk about that? Is the way when you talk about that example or story, I can see a shift in you. Like, having a sounding board is really important. Don't put your talks together in isolation.
Jill, another thing that I think women in particular that we struggle with, it's this notion of self-promotion, because we've been told that when we talk about our accomplishments, it comes across as self-promotion. And especially if you're looking to be an influencer, or not an influencer in the sense of social media, but like if you're trying to move people, you have to talk about what you do and you have to do. So how do you coach women in particular to get over that? And how can you talk about accomplishments or the topic that or the thing that you want people to do in a way that it's received in the way it was intended, I guess?
Yeah. Well, it's been a racket for a long time. making women feel we're socialized not to kind of stand in our power. Even if maybe our parents said you can do anything, we're still met with obstacles and messages, at times penalized for speaking to our accomplishments. So I'm not going to deny the reality that there are going to be some people that will bristle. But I always tell women, there are men out there with half of the accomplishments and qualifications that you have that are happily coasting by us in a lot of different ways. So Tiffany said, agreed. Yeah, I'm with you, Tiffany. So couple of things. Number one, we have to be an advocate for ourselves. I was raised to you better work really, really hard. Excuse me. If you work really hard, people will notice your work, and you will rise because of that. And that's not always the case. A lot of times it's the person that's developing a network, speaking to their ability and speaking to their vision, that will get the chances to take on, stretch assignments or to get more opportunities. So what I would tell you is this: in this day and age in particular, you have to be able to speak to your strengths, your accomplishments, your vision. And that's that branding piece I work with clients, is what are you known for? So the word I always use for myself is I'm here to work to build bridges. The reason I do the work I do is because if we're talking past each other, we will not be able to handle small things or big things. And so my passion, and that's a word I'd encourage you to use, could be passion or the thing I love doing, or, my purpose. If you can connect to the emotional piece to the work you do, then it won't feel as cheesy, like you're overdoing it with the, tooting your own horn. Use the words like that, the reason I care about this is I've spent 15 years doing X and Y. So you can start with the thing that matters to you, that you feel that deep connection to, and then you can list how that has shown up over the years. And the last thing I would remind you to do when you're putting together your own bio and you're going to speak to things is write it as if you were writing it for a friend. Mm-hmm. Do you ever notice that you're amazing with you meet somebody socially and you go, oh, Sarah, Sarah, let me tell you about Sarah. And then someone says, well, what do you do? And you go, oh, I lead a company. There's, we kind of, we turn down the volume when it has to do with us. Most of the people that are worried about sounding like they're bragging are not the people who brag. Just so you know.
100%. What about, so there are some women in here that, all of them have incredible stories to be told. How do we find opportunities if they're not coming to us?
Yeah.
How do we find opportunities to tell our story?
Yeah. So there are a couple ways. So the work I do, I have corporate clients where I develop their internal speaker roster. So it's, identifying the senior executives and the up and coming leaders, the high potentials who should be front and center representing the company, speaking at different events. And then I work with individuals who want to work on their content. So Erica came to me as an individual. So I work with both. So what I would suggest is, if you know that speaking is something that you want to do, and I recommend it, this is the golden age of speaking, just so you know. There are more events than ever. I've been in the field for 30 years. We've never had this many events. Even with COVID and things shutting down, there are virtual events that you can leverage, and it's easier now. You don't have to get on, you don't have to get on a plane and schlep across the country. So number one, I want you to think about, if you want to get out there and do more speaking, I have my clients do an exercise based on who is in your network The fastest path to any stage is through your own network. And for years, most events have, the speakers, 80% of them have been men, but there is an opportunity for you to be on stages, and you probably have some male advocates and allies that would help. But what matters is you stepping back and thinking about, who do I know who has either spoken at the event I'm interested in? Who do I work with who has done some speaking? What is my organization doing? So if you work in an organization where you have internal comms, where you have some sort of vendor who's in PR, is letting them know that you want to be considered, and paying attention to the industry events. So think about your network. That includes your personal network and the professional network within your organizations or associations. I can give you I can do a really quick exercise that you can write down. It's what I teach. I teach this at Stanford Law School for business development. So I call it the 4 A's. And basically, there's 4 different levels of the contacts that you have in your network. So the first A are your advocates. Your advocates, we generally have fewer than 8. They're the people closest to us that think we're amazing. Like, they may not be related to you. Remember that. You may have a relative that hasn't smiled for 6 years. That's not the person I'm talking about. I'm talking about someone who is, if they knew you were looking to do more speaking, they'd go, this is so exciting. Let's brainstorm. I know, like, they'll be on it if they know that that's what you want to do. So your advocates are the people that know you really well, and they're in your corner no matter what. The next group are your allies. Your allies, socially. They are people who you've worked with. It may actually be a family member, but if they're receptive and they will hear what you have to say and they'll help out. What people don't realize is, if the fastest path to a stage is through your network, it's not necessarily that your best friend runs an event. The power of loose ties is you may be close to someone that's 1 or 2 degrees away from someone who can help. So your allies are people that you've worked with, that was a good work friend, people that maybe you went to school with. And the next group are your associates. Your associates are people that you've met at events, people that you've worked with over the years. You know them pretty well, but they don't know you as well. The mistake people will make is they will ask associates. They'll make a big ask of someone who they don't know very well. So you don't know that person's reputation, and they may not know you well enough to risk their reputation making a recommendation. So it's great when we would, exchange business cards and but get to know who the people are, because I get, my inbox, I generally get somewhere between 15 and 30 messages on LinkedIn every single day from people. And they're like, oh, I want to do a TEDx on your stage, they just demand. I don't know who this person is. They haven't even researched that our particular event only focuses on pretty much all of our speakers. It's original source, groundbreaking developments in technology and science. Like, we're the nerdiest TEDx out there. And so our event is curated. We don't accept submissions the way 99% of the other thousands of TEDx events do, but it shows like they didn't even look at our site to see who we are. So those associates matter, but the ties are not as close. And then the last A that I want you to think about, I call that like the aspirational group. So most women are like, I want to do something with Oprah. I want to do something with Brene Brown. I want to do something with, fill in the blank, amazing CEO that they respect. You're probably only a couple of degrees away from some of the most powerful women and men out there. So fastest path where to start, aside from Googling events in your industry, is internal and your internal network, your personal ones, and then asking people in your organization.
Jill, can I ask you a quick follow-up question? So I have been getting a lot of speaking requests for panels that I don't necessarily feel like I don't feel like I'm being asked to speak on something about which I'm an expert. I will say that. But I do have sort of a related to your 3-point proof in action. I do sort of have a related point I would love to talk about. Do you have some advice? Like, should I say yes and just get my point across, or say, "Ooh, I don't know if I'm qualified, but I'm happy to," and sort of the same question, sorry to take up so much time, but same question about often when I'm given a description of the panel, I don't feel like it's enough information to really get to the point proof in action that you're talking about. Like, I got one the other day that was, it's a forum on higher education with, and we're really trying, it's the Tulsa Global Alliance asked for it, but it's on higher education. And it's clear that they're really asking me because I'm female and they can't think of anyone else. So like, should I say yes or should I say no?
Okay, so I like this question because I think a lot of women experience this. Number one, am I a fit for the particular event? And what happens if, is it a missed opportunity if I say no, et cetera? So what I would love for all of you, the power of this network that you're all a part of, is you all have connections and resources to events. So what matters first is you being really clear about what you want to speak on. Exposure is great, but if it's not a fit, there are times where it can work against us. It's great to be the outlier. If you're the person, I did this with a client who, she was an expert at customer experience. And I said, you need to show up at all this, let's get you in the sales, these big sales events, because you get to come show up on stage as the outlier and say, hi, I come from the future. You're selling stuff that we can't deliver as a company. Like you'll kill it. It'll be great. For you, for all of you, think about what are the topics that you can speak to very clearly, very confidently, and passionately. That's your ideal bucket. But there's some peripheral ones that you're probably pretty decent at, Elizabeth. So this is where I put my event producer hat on, where I think, okay, partner with the event itself, follow up and say, when you reached out to me, I'm happy to consider the event. I think it's great. What are some of the topics and messages that you feel would be most relevant and useful to your audience, such as, don't make them think it, because then they'll think you don't know what you're talking about. List a couple of themes and give them the chance to respond to it. I'm not the type that feels that people should just drive their message no matter what, because I'm the producer of events. I know what that's like when I'm watching a panelist. I'm like, what are they talking about? Nobody even asks that. Not that you would do it that overtly, but it does happen. So that's where you start with, I know what I talk about. I know what my value is. Here are a couple of ideas. I think it could be valuable. What do would this be a fit for you? The other thing I'd want all of you to do is to, within your own community, is for you to get clear around who else can speak to peripheral topics. So I always have a list. When I was a speaker, I always have a list of like 10 or 15 other people I can refer. And that's always great. So you don't have to think ahead you don't have to think on the spot. You've thought of people, oh, they're going to call me. I did a lot of diversity inclusion work for years. I don't do it anymore, but I coach a lot of people who do it. So obviously with this year, I got so many requests, and I would say, oh, I can recommend all kinds of, you want someone on allyship? Here are these people. You want someone who wants to talk about, restructuring your hiring and recruitment process, so I would put the list ahead of time. And then the third thing I would suggest you all do, if you're interested in speaking and you want to get more speaking events right now, today, on your LinkedIn profile, adds the words speaker to your description. So you show up in searches. So people can find you and they know that that's what you do. the lead times, nobody's going to call you and say, can you speak for us in 10 minutes? It doesn't, you're going to have time. If someone reaches out to you, you'll have time to prep something.
The other question, and this came from Casey, she said, not directly related to public speaking, but any advice on how to respond when being interrupted?
Yeah.
I think we all want the answer to that.
Absolutely. First thing, screensaver. So you are going to do one of two things when you get interrupted over and over. One is either I want to fight you, furrowed brow, which is my default, where I look at somebody like that, or wait, hold on. Or like that's mean, where the eyebrows do this because you feel like so you need a screensaver, which means you just raise your eyebrow, this brow line, you just raise it a teeny bit, watch. So you know that there's a screensaver then, and you have a few go-to phrases that ahead of time you know you're going to say. Oh, hold up a minute, Kevin. I wanted to finish what I was saying. Thanks. John, I'm assuming they're men. John, that's why I was bringing up that point. So I'd love to go further on that. So it's like somebody stealing your idea, say their name, because when people hear their name, they're more likely to kind of notice. And you have that, I'd love to continue what I'm saying. Or, John, hold on, let me finish. And then I'll throw it right back to you. And this is totally fake because my default is like, but I used to pout. I didn't do anything. I would just go, versus knowing that you say, I'd like to finish, I'd like to continue, hold on a second. And if you can, put your hands up as a quick gesture, say their name and redirect. If it's a pattern, then you have to talk to that person offline and just say, hey, listen, you may not realize it. The past few meetings, when I was talking about X, you jumped in. Give them specificity so they don't say, give me an example. They will almost always say that. So notice when it's happening so you have evidence.
Yeah. That's great. And I love what Amy said. She quoted, Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris. Yeah. I mean, it happens a lot. It's not many men are not, and women aren't aware of when they're doing it. But if we don't call it out, it continues. And your voice needs to be heard. The world needs you.
If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review and subscribe to our podcast for future episodes. You can also join the conversation by becoming a VEST member. Go to www.vester.co and apply today.